I think we can go ahead and do the meeting. 上佛堂，参加身鞠躬、一鞠躬、再鞠躬、三鞠躬，参加各位点传是一鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。Please be seated. Bill, it's all yours. Please feel free to begin. I'm going to go ahead and mute my microphone.
Thank you, sir, and good morning, everybody, or good afternoon or evening, or whatever it happens to be where you are. It is just a beautiful fall day in Indianapolis. It's going to get up around 70, 73 degrees, a little uncharacteristically warm, and so it's a great day for being outside. It's sunny, and the leaves are changing, and it's a wonderful thing to get to see. I hope wherever you are, it's pleasant and warm as well. A couple of weeks ago, we started this discussion on building a compassionate life, a life of service to others, a life perhaps more free from some of the attachments and desires and illusions of the ego self that get us from time to time. And this week I'd kind of like to finish that up. Yeah, there we go. If you'll recall from a couple of weeks ago, where we started off was with moderating desires, giving up as many of our attachments as makes sense, living a life of non-contention, learning to be content, and practicing compassion. And so, among the larger, broader points that we covered, to kind of recap, it is our desires, our attachments, our ego selves that bring us our suffering. And those things always bring us suffering. Does that mean that all of our desires and attachments are bad? No, it doesn't. For instance, I'm very attached to my wife and children, but that attachment at some point will cause them suffering and me suffering. At some point, for instance, I'm going to pass away, and because my wife and children are also attached to me at that moment, they're going to endure some suffering. So, and when it comes to our desires and our attachments, it's wise to make those choices, and to make those choices wisely, to choose the things that we're going to be attached to, the things that we're going to have a strong desire to have one way or another, so that we can at least attempt to moderate the degree of suffering that we're going to have to endure. It's not possible for us to go against the natural order of things ultimately. It's not possible for us ultimately to swim against the flow of the Tao. Those things ultimately cannot be overcome. We can try for our entire lives, but a life on this planet is very, very short, and our power over nature is extremely limited. So it's best if we learn the principles of moderation and action without attachment, and to limit and moderate our desires. We talked about living non-contention, about not getting sucked into the pointless discussions, the pointless debates, the conflicts that we get into with other people, most of which are unbelievably petty and inconsequential, and even where there's a high degree of importance perhaps attached to the conflict, the price for getting into one is never worth the benefit. It's not within our power or our sphere of influence to make another person think or feel the way we think they ought to. And we can't persuade anybody to change their mind or their core beliefs or their values or anything else. that always comes from inside a person. And so my encouragement to all of you was to try to live your lives not as a battle to be fought and won or lost, but rather as a journey that simply doesn't end just because we pass on, where it's not necessary to overcome others, but much more important to overcome ourselves. Learning contentment, a huge principle in Tao cultivation. The ability to be, if not overwhelmingly joyful, at least happy with and satisfied with our lot in life as we work to improve ourselves spiritually and in other ways. When one does not live in a contented frame of mind, then there always is conflict within the mind. There's a continually new goal to be strived for, a new asset or piece of property to be acquired, always something newer, better, more, whatever. This is one of those places where until we learn to moderate our ego selves, we can find ourselves in a great deal of trouble, both in our secular and our spiritual lives. It means if we are contented, that we can be like the Tao in the low places that people disdain, and yet still be okay with where we are. And the ramification of that statement is that in living a life of service to others, in whatever way we're able to do that, we may at times find ourselves in the places that other people do not like, the low places where other people do not go. It's incumbent upon us, if we are truly searching for that life of service, to be ready to show that compassion and that service to others. And heaven knows there are people all over, without having to even leave the cities we're in, who need the assistance, the help, the reassurance, the compassion, the things that we can offer. Contentment and humility go hand in hand. As long as we see ourselves as above and apart from everybody else, as long as we place ourselves over others, we can't ever truly be content, and we can't ever show real compassion to other people. It is very easy, unfortunately for us, to draw the dividing line between us and them, to cast derision upon others, and to disparage their circumstances and their existences as being somewhat less valuable than our own, and for a variety of reasons, some of them concocted purely by our own society and advertising. Case in point, the ideal of feminine beauty, for one, has changed over the last, 300 to 500 years, from being a fairly Rubenesque portrait of feminine beauty to being stick thin. And because society values that, people go along with it. It is a difficult challenge to attempt to achieve that level of what society says we ought to look like in a relatively normal, healthy human being who doesn't have the benefit of having their pictures photoshopped. But whether you do or you don't, that perception is a perception created by very largely the media, and not by the relatively normal people in our society. It's an unattainable goal, an unreachable standard. And for as long as we strive to move ourselves towards that unreachable goal, we sacrifice our ability to achieve contentment and humility. The way of the Tao is not to struggle against those things, not to succumb to the illusions of power and ownership and control, not to allow our ego self to run away with our reason and the intuition of the true self, the Buddha nature. And therefore that becomes very important in a life of service and compassion towards other people. We also talked briefly a bit about practicing compassion, because learning to create a compassionate life, to look upon all people as just other souls trying to find their way home like we are, is something that has to be learned. It's not something that we're innately born with, I think. I think we can have perhaps a behavioral predisposition towards more or less compassion, depending upon the environment in which we're raised. But learning to be truly humble and truly compassionate is a commitment and not an event. It doesn't just happen because something hits us over the head one day. In I would say virtually all cases, it's something where there's a realization made over time that some of the things we've been taught since our earliest childhood and some of the things we believed for our entire lives are not necessarily true, and furthermore not necessarily desirable, and that some of those things are actually harmful, if not simply ambivalent towards other people. For instance, the standards on beauty. To be able to practice a life of real compassion, one has to be willing, as with many of the other Tao teachings, to have it feel a bit unnatural at first, to have it go against what we think is a tried and true axiom of living. It means that every now and again we need to wear the rubber band around our wrist so that when we find ourselves behaving in a discompassionate way, we can snap the rubber band and remind ourselves that what we're trying to learn is a much more spiritual path with a much higher calling. And if we can do that over a period of time, as our behavior changes, our thought processes will also change. I've seen this process work in myself many times over, learning to apply the Tao teachings. And fortunately, I started when I was old enough to understand the difference and able to honestly and realistically critique the results. And I'm not by any stretch of the imagination going to say that I'm anybody's sage or anybody's guru, but in my own life, I have seen tremendous change as a result of conscientious and very deliberate applied practice of these teachings, with the stated goal of learning and mastering the deeper spiritual truths. I know that our own excessive desires and unbridled attachments destroy compassion. Those things put a line in the sand between us and other people that doesn't allow for us to see the similarities, but rather only the differences. And so when we're stuck in that situation, once again, it's an us versus them sort of a way of living, and it excludes great numbers of people simply because they're not us. When one is living in a truly compassionate way, service to others becomes the hallmark of that life, where there's no fear or anxiety about the demonstrations of compassion, and likewise no fanfare or any need to make a big production out of it. It simply becomes something that we do. And the absence of prejudice is the sign of a life moving towards that compassionate existence, where we no longer separate other people from ourselves based on what we can only see or what we think to be true about certain groups of people. Prejudices like that led to the Holocaust and to other acts of genocide and horrible things that have been done to other people on this planet, strictly in the name of differences, in the supposed lack of human commonality. That prejudice has allowed one group of people to dehumanize another group of people and then systematically attempt to destroy them in more cases than just one. The Holocaust perhaps is the most famous, but there have been instances in Europe and all over Africa where the same sorts of behaviors have been observed with the same result. It is unbelievably important to a compassionate life to remove the perception of the differences and see the similarities instead. That all people are worthy of compassion and worthy of their existence, no matter where they wound up or how they got there. It's definitely not for me, nor any of the rest of us, to attempt to unravel the karmic web of another person. It isn't possible for me. If somebody else can do it, go right ahead, but I absolutely cannot. Then we pick it up at reducing the ego. Our ego self is our continual partner. That's the us we carry with us until the day we die. And who knows, maybe after that. It's the source of our survival, and it's also the source of most all of our suffering. It's the ego self that reminds us to get up off the couch and go make something to eat for supper. It's our ego self that reminds us to, pay the rent or the mortgage and get a car and go to work and all that other stuff. It is that part of us that wants, that desires, that needs to go forth and do things. But it's also the part of us that creates desire and attachments and that perceives the differences between people. It is the part of us that succumb to the illusions of power and ownership and control. And so serving the ego to the exclusion of the other areas of knowledge and wisdom in our lives robs us of the ability to be compassionate. It takes away from us our contentment and replaces it with an empty gnawing hole in our heart and spirit that we can't ever fill with enough stuff. The desires and attachments we carry with us from the ego self only serve to feed that ego self. And so, for as long as we allow ourselves to pursue our desires and our attachments in an unfettered way, we allow the ego self to grow and we allow it to control us. Fortunately, through the practices of humility and moderation, the ego self can be reduced. I'm not sure that the complete and utter elimination of the ego self is either possible nor necessarily beneficial. I think to a certain degree, having an instinctive survival nature and something that motivates us to go out and do well for ourselves and others is important. But by the same token, I think it's essential that we recognize the good and beneficial parts and the parts that serve almost as an addictive behavior. Real honest to goodness, genuine contentment, and understanding that we are where we are in life because we are supposed to be there and we're okay with that, is one of the ways to keep the ego self in check. And it's important. Hand in hand with that goes humility. And humility, like compassion, isn't something that we're necessarily born with. It's something we have to learn. We are all born looking for the attention of our parents and anybody else who will pay attention to us. I've been very blessed to have young grandchildren running around my home. And so once again, I'm looking at the 2 and 3 and 4-year-old human being. I love them dearly, and they're wonderful kids. But you see varying stages in toddlers of the psychological development of people. At 2 and 3, everything's mine. Mine. It's adorable until it starts a full-on temper tantrum, and then it becomes one of the things that we want to make stop as quickly as we possibly can. Why do toddlers do that? Because it gets the attention of their parents. And at 2 years old, we all needed that attention a lot. We weren't capable of taking care of ourselves. A 2-year-old baby, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, those kids are all completely innocent. They have absolutely no knowledge other than perhaps an indwelling of the true self, a connection from birth to the great Tao, that they are a spiritual creature. Although I believe that all small children are completely pure and completely connected to the Tao, it's without intellect. And we can learn a lesson there. Real humility, the humility that comes from within the true self, doesn't have an agenda. It doesn't have a hidden purpose. It's not contrived, practiced, but not created or fabricated. It simply is. Humility doesn't shine. It doesn't seek attention. It doesn't wave the flags and blow the trumpets. It's not contrived or manipulative. It is not an instrument to be used to get other people to do what we want. Okay? Humility is all about us. It's never about them. And us in that context is all inclusive. Humility helps to open up the compassionate heart. It allows us to see the much bigger picture, the wider view. And perhaps now and again it helps us to ask the question as we look upon somebody else, gee, what if that were me there? There have been times in my life where I've been unbelievably fortunate, or where the most unexpected help has come to me from the most unexpected people and places. And when that happens, I'm always extremely grateful that it did. But I'm also able these days to consider what might have been the case had it not been for the circumstances and perhaps in a lot of those cases, kindness of others. And so the question, what if that were me, becomes a very relevant question in a life of compassion, because it allows us to see ourselves in the same general circumstances that perhaps we're seeing other people. So at the end of all of the various teachings and steps and practices, what do we get? Well, if we do it right, a sense of joy that never quits, peace in the mind and in the spirit, wisdom and experience, and those things are all precious to us. You know, the reason that the Yuan Dao doesn't support a monastic order is because cultivating the Tao teachings is not something that's done in a cave. It's done in the world. The world is the classroom. The world is the cave, with all of the people and situations left in it. Because it's easy to cultivate and apply the teachings if the only person to whom we need to apply them is us. Fortunately or not, however you choose to look at it, the world's full of people and getting more full. And the need for those who understand real compassion is tremendous. Now, I'm going to tell you from personal experience, and many of you probably already know this, the occasional mistake, misunderstanding, and falling down are all part of learning, no matter what discipline it is we're attempting to learn. I have not gotten out of bed every morning and mastered a new teaching a day for the last 10 years. Sometimes it takes years for me to understand the teachings, let alone apply them correctly. And there are some that I've been working on from day one that I'm still working on, and I know I'm not quite there yet, but I get a little closer every day. That's kind of the compassionate path. It's knowing that we may not get it right all the time, but we're going to make a little progress every day, and we're going to bring everybody we can with us. Forgiveness and tolerance and compassion that includes even ourselves is a part of that learning process. It's a wonderful thing to be able to forgive others. It's an absolute essentiality to be able to forgive ourselves. It's a wonderful thing to be tolerant of other people. It is essential that we're tolerant and patient with ourselves. It is a worthy and heartfelt goal to be compassionate with others, but it is essential that we are compassionate, albeit brutally honest, with ourselves. A life of self-deprecation and continual self-abuse in one way or another does not produce spiritual growth. Ruthlessly honest introspection, a bit of compassion, and the understanding that we will learn more and do better the next time does. Yeah. The other thing is that contrary to popular belief in many cases, it's absolutely necessary to use the force of will to practice the teachings. Sometimes it is much more simple, much more convenient to ignore what it is we're trying to do in favor of just letting things happen the way they are. And okay, sometimes maybe that's the right thing to do. But if we are not prepared to apply a certain force of will to practice and learn the teachings, we will never learn and master the teachings. So when someone tells you that you don't have to do anything to eventually one day become a Tao sage or a master of the Tao teachings, either they don't understand the Tao teachings or they're leading you in the wrong direction. There absolutely is effort required, but the effort is well worth it for the results. Compassion doesn't just include the folks we like. It includes all of them. The good and the bad, the beautiful, the ugly, the criminals, the beggars, thieves, and the saints, and ourselves. It is the goal of learning to follow the teachings to live a compassionate and humble life. And that goal is a remarkably worthy thing. We have to learn to have the kind of flexibility that allows service to others to come forth from within us. And we have to have enough flexibility to gain the experience that living in this world is meant to give us. Now, we may absolutely look strange to other people. Our words may sound strange. The way we do things may appear strange. And I've had that happen too. But it's been many, many years since anybody's ever been able to fault my motives or my agenda. Because my motives are to help everyone wherever I possibly can and to do what's best for everybody. And then one day at the end of our life's journey, however many lives, lifetimes, and occurrences that takes, we're all hoping, I hope, to find enlightenment, whatever that means to you, that spiritual growth, that attainment of ultimate truth and awakening. That's my wish for all of you, myself, and every living thing, is that one day we all find that we all find the answers we're looking for. I don't know if enlightenment is the end of the path, if that's something that perhaps we see going by on our way between reincarnations or not. I'm not sure I'd know it if it happened to me. But it's something that I look for. And I know that living on the Tao path is one sure way to be rid of the fears and the attachments and the desires and the other issues with living in a less spiritual existence, and to gain strength and tranquility on this journey, so that one day perhaps enlightenment is where I land. And if we're all following the Tao teachings to the best of our ability, and we're not living a life that has more joy in it, more peace, more contentment, then maybe we need to be looking at our path. I've said time and time and time again over the years that the results of applying these teachings in one's life are scientifically reproducible, that they can be reproduced using the scientific method. I'm not kidding when I say that. I've done it. I've seen other people do it. I've been doing this for a relatively long time. And it's the truth. Now, it may not be the only answer, but it certainly is one sure way to a more peaceful, more joyous life. We all choose our own path. We all have to. And heaven knows what I'm talking to you about now. You can feel free to accept or reject at any moment you want. I practice these teachings as my religion, but you by no means are obligated to do likewise. You have to make those choices for yourself, the ones that work for you. I believe that humility and compassion and moderation and simplicity are the keys to contentment and peace. And that those things are the keys to a compassionate life. That non-contention is absolutely the way to harmonize our relationships with others. And I think it's probably the biggest and most important way to harmonize those relationships. And I absolutely know that these teachings help us to transform our lives and ourselves, and to allow us to be free from fear, and to become the compassionate and spiritual people that our true selves would have us to be. Thank you all very much for letting me share with you, and as always, I do hope that something I said was helpful for one of you or so. Thank you very much.